Our gospel lesson this morning comes from the Gospel of John, chapter 1, beginning at verse 43. And it is Jesus' call to two of his disciples. The next day, Jesus decided to go to Galilee. He found Philip and said to him, "Follow me." Now Philip was from Bethsaida, the city of Andrew and Peter. Philip found Nathanael and said to him, "We have found him about whom Moses in the law and also the prophets wrote, Jesus, son of Joseph from Nazareth." Nathanael said to him, "Can anything good come out of Nazareth?" Philip said to him, "Come and see." When Jesus saw Nathanael coming toward him, he said of him, "Here is truly an Israelite in whom there is no deceit." Nathanael asked him, "Where did you get to know me?" Jesus answered, "I saw you under the fig tree before Philip called you." Nathanael replied, "Rabbi, you are the Son of God. You are the King of Israel." Jesus answered, "Do you believe because I told you that I saw you under the fig tree? You will see greater things than these." And he said to him, "Very truly I tell you, you will see heaven opened and the angels of God ascending and descending upon the Son of Man." This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. As we were preparing for this morning's worship, a few of the behind the scenes people were counting up the number of times we have had virtual worship services, and I think it's in the mid 40s. It's been almost a year. Come March, it will be a year. And a year ago, none of us could have predicted how the year 2020 would have turned out. Recession, pandemic, mass protests, and an intense election. All of these things are identified as 4 super disruptor events, all of which occurred in 2020. In the history of our nation, there have been other years in which maybe 3 of these kinds of events occurred. 1919 was one, 1957, and 1968. But only in 2020 did all 4 of these events take place. And we know that 2021 may be characterized in much the same way. So as we are all mixed up in the craziness of our current times, it's our challenge and our necessary task to discern how Christ is calling us to follow him. A few nights ago, I woke up at about 3:30 in the morning, and I couldn't get back to sleep. And as I was lying there in bed, I was surprised to hear a voice whisper my name, "Anne, Anne." And it sounded to me like Charlie's voice, but I could hear Charlie's breath of sleep going up and down, and I knew he was sound asleep. And I don't know if it was my subconscious, as I had been ruminating about preaching on this passage about Samuel, but something within me said, perhaps this is a divine voice that I'm hearing. And so I found myself just in my own mind saying the words of Samuel, "Speak, Lord, for your servant listens." Now, I still haven't figured out if God was wanting to say something specific to me. I don't really fully understand what that experience was all about. but I am still listening because I believe that God may very well be speaking to all of us regularly, if only we have the ears to listen for God's voice. It was Eli who helped Samuel understand that the voice he was hearing might just be God's voice. And the next time Samuel heard the voice calling his name, he made the decision to listen. Many years later, Philip heard Jesus' voice calling him to follow, and Philip made the decision to respond by running first to find his friend Nathanael, excitedly urging him to come and see Jesus, because Philip's first impression was that Jesus was the one of whom the prophets had spoken. And even though Nathanael was skeptical, he made the decision to leave his home and go with Philip to meet Jesus. Decisions to say yes to God can change the course of one's life. God calls us, invites us, and desires us to enter into a personal relationship which changes us, can take us to new places, teaches us, and helps us to mature in faith and wisdom and knowledge of God. Choosing to listen to God, to follow Jesus, or to commit oneself to pursuing a life of faith is one decision, which also means leaving behind familiar places, stepping out of comfort zones, and diligently pursuing the direction toward which the divine voice is calling us. One of our church members, who is now 90 years old, has said that once he and his wife made the decision that they would go to worship on every Sunday morning, they never had to make that decision again. If any of their 4 children would ask, "Are we going to church this Sunday?" they could say yes, always yes, because they had made the decision a long time ago. It keeps things easier that way. One decision of commitment is all that is needed, and that commitment can guide a million other decisions throughout your life. It's a lot like saying yes to marriage. You make a commitment to love, honor, and cherish that one person, a commitment to be faithful through hard and challenging times, as well as the times when loving is easy and a joy. That's the nature of love, isn't it? Love is far more complex than an emotion. It involves a million decisions to choose to do what is loving. Love asks, "How can I help?" Even when it may not be convenient or expedient. Love gets out of bed before we want to, thinks ahead to plan dinner, and sets aside time for important conversations. Love looks out for the good of others and chooses to do what will benefit them. Love chooses to speak the truth with kindness and compassion. Long before Samuel heard God's voice speaking to him and chose to listen, his mother, Hannah, made a decision to honor her promise made to God that if God would ease the suffering and humiliation she faced because she was unable to have any children, by allowing her to give birth to a male child, she would give that child back to serve God. And as soon as she had weaned Samuel, she brought Samuel to Eli the priest, so that Samuel might grow up serving the Lord. Eli made the decision to take on young Samuel and train him in the ways of the Lord. In some ways, it seems that Samuel gave Eli another chance to get things right as both a parent and a priest. Back in those days, priesthood was a family business. Priests came from families which could trace their genealogy to Moses's brother Aaron. The backstory is that Eli had two sons who corrupted the role of priests. When meat was being sacrificed to God, they helped themselves to whatever they wanted. And the same was true about the women who served at the entrance to the place of worship. Eli's sons helped themselves. And when Eli learned of the corruption of his sons and the bad reputation that they had gained for themselves in his house, he pleaded with them to restore honor to their positions as priests. But Eli was unable to deter his sons from their corrupt ways, and he lived with this heartache his entire life. But God is in the restoration business. And sometimes God must tear down what is corrupt and evil before something good can be raised up. Eli receives a warning from another man of God who tells him that God is so upset with the greed and corruption of Eli's sons that no one in his family would live to an old age, and that his sons would both die on the same day. So when Samuel heard God's message of God's judgment against the corruption of Eli's sons, we can understand why Samuel was reluctant to pass along the heart-wrenching news to Eli. But we can also respect Eli for his desire to hear God's message, as difficult as he suspected it might be to hear. His desire to honor God's painful truth is a reflection of Eli's faithfulness. Although Eli's sons would be brought down, Samuel would be raised up, and God would use Samuel to call forth others to step into roles of leadership. We have seen throughout history what greed and corruption in leadership looks like. Empires have fallen because of it. The Protestant Reformation occurred because of it, and we have seen it in our own lifetime. We have seen the exploitation of others by leaders of the church, Hollywood moguls, politicians, celebrities, and leaders in law enforcement, even schools and businesses. You can find corruption in places attributed with honor and positions of esteem. We have seen what it is like when a leader is more motivated by what will serve his or her own purpose than what will serve the good of others. We know how ego, money, lust, fame, insecurity, prejudice, and fear can erect walls of alienation between neighbors. In recent days, we have seen what happens when conspiracy theories become trusted over the truth. The vast majority of our nation has been stunned by the actions of a mob of insurrectionists who invaded our nation's capital on January 6th, who caused our national leaders to cower in fear for their lives, and whose actions led to the deaths of 5 people. And the simultaneous occurrence of this event with events in many other states raises questions about all of the factors which contributed to these events, along with the racist underpinnings and the failure to see that a violent act of insurrection against duly elected lawmakers is a far cry from what it truly means to help make America great. Along with you and many others in this nation, I have been reflecting upon how we have arrived here at this point and observed a crisis of leadership in many forms. The Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. offered some wisdom for how our leaders and we too can be guided in our decision making about how we respond in times like these. King said, "Cowardice asks the question, is it safe? Expediency asks the question, is it politic? Vanity asks the question, is it popular? But conscience asks the question, is it right?" And there comes a time, King says, when one must take a position that is neither safe, nor politic, nor popular, but one must take it because one's conscience tells one that it is right. In times like these, our faith cannot be silent. And it is up to us to make our own decisions about what it looks like for us to follow Jesus. As I've been thinking about this, I have come to this conclusion. Following Jesus means honoring the one who is the way, the truth, and the life. By walking in the way of Jesus, learning from the truth Jesus taught, and patterning my life after Jesus' own life. This kind of living takes us beyond the initial first decision to follow Jesus, but it leads to millions of decisions we make throughout our lives. It causes us to give more weight to listening to those whose lives reflect moral integrity, respect for human rights, self-restraint, and humility. These are the people I will respect. Following Jesus means choosing what will be most loving of my neighbor by demonstrating compassion toward others in need, becoming a friend to those who are alienated, working towards solutions which will grow a healthier community, and finding ways to build bridges across divides. And in those ways, we can honor Jesus. And we will all stumble and falter, maybe even get sidetracked for a bit of time. But I think Jesus calls us all toward what Eugene Peterson named as a long obedience in the same direction. How do you hear Jesus calling you? Will you join with me in prayer, please? Oh Lord, call each one of us to follow you. And there are opportunities to make decisions that will please you, and opportunities to mess up every single day. Give us the discipline to be your disciples, and give us the desire to learn from you. May we turn our hearts and our lives toward you so that we may build together your kingdom of justice and peace. Amen.